When an Arab-American girl took her father's job as a janitor at the Pentagon, the entire defense negotiation had to stop for her. They didn't see her until she dropped the mop bucket in the middle of the corridor, and by then, silence had already fallen like a curtain. Not out of respect, out of disbelief. The Pentagon doesn't flinch easily. Its walls are built to hold secrets, its people trained to suppress emotion, its routines rigid, sterile, military. But none of that prepared them for a 13-year-old girl with olive skin, almond eyes, and a janitor's badge swinging from her neck that read, Maryam Haddad. She stood barefoot. She hadn't meant to, but the cheap sneakers she wore had soaked through with the DC rain, and the cold linoleum gave her blisters. Her tiny hands gripped the mop handle like it was a sword, knuckles raw from scrubbing floors since 5 a.m. Her hijab, faded blue and too large for her face, had slipped slightly, revealing dark, damp curls underneath. The four-star general froze mid-step. A diplomat from Norway halted his whispering translator. The sound of her mop bucket slamming echoed like gunfire. For a second, no one breathed. That hallway wasn't just a hallway, it led directly to Conference Room D, where classified joint defense discussions between NATO allies were being held. But today, nobody was talking about nuclear deterrence or cyber threats. All eyes had shifted to the brown girl with the mop. They thought she was a threat. She was just a daughter. Maryam hadn't meant to be noticed. In fact, her plan was to be invisible. Slip in, clean fast, leave before the early meetings began. That's what her father had told her. No eye contact, Habibti. No words. Just work. But that morning, Abu hadn't woken up. His lungs had rattled in the night, the same way they had since coming home from his third overnight shift in a row. His coughing sounded like gravel being crushed under boots. She touched his forehead. Boiling. His eyes never opened. And with no health insurance, no paid sick leave, and a rent due in 3 days, there was no choice. Maryam took his Pentagon badge and uniform. She pinned the cap over her hijab and boarded the 4:55 bus. Alone. Her plan worked. Until 9:17 a.m. Until her mop slipped and spilled dirty water across the polished tile outside the most secure room in the building. Until someone screamed, "Who the hell let her in here?" Colonel Bridges's voice could cut through bulletproof glass. Maryam flinched. Her fingers tightened around the mop handle. Her heart raced, but her feet didn't move. "2M here for my father. He's sick." The colonel narrowed his eyes. "What's your name?" "Maryam." "Last name?" "Haddad." He stepped forward. "You think you can just walk in here, pretending to be a federal employee? You know this is impersonation of government personnel, right? That's a federal offense." A woman in a navy suit and heels murmured into a walkie. 2 guards in uniform appeared instantly. Maryam's voice cracked. "Please. My dad works here. He cleans this floor. He has for 7 years. I didn't come to lie. I came to clean. That's all." "You don't belong here," the colonel said louder. "This is a secure zone. We don't let children or civilians in, especially not unauthorized ones." He meant especially not Arab ones. She saw it in his eyes. The same eyes that followed her at the airport. The same kind that looked past her mother at the grocery store. The kind that labeled her before she opened her mouth. But she didn't move. Instead, she took a slow breath, dropped the mop, and reached into her oversized janitor pocket. Everyone tensed. A soldier even reached for his belt. But all she pulled out was a crumpled notebook. Notebooks weren't weapons. Until now. "I didn't come here to start anything," she said, voice trembling but rising. "But if you're going to accuse me of being a threat just for standing here, then maybe you should hear me out." "You're done talking," snapped the colonel. "No," said another voice. Everyone turned. An older woman with silver hair and glasses stood near the corner of the corridor. Civilian attire, badge clearance, black level. Senior Pentagon staff. Her nameplate read, Dr. Elaine Monroe, Policy and Ethics Oversight. "Let the girl speak." Colonel Bridges stiffened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is highly irregular." "And so is threatening a child in a federal building," Dr. Monroe interrupted. "Unless you're trying to start an international incident over a mop." The room stilled again. Dr. Monroe looked at Maryam. "You said you had something to say." Maryam nodded. Her knees were shaking, but she stepped forward, her notebook in hand. "My name is Maryam Haddad. I'm 13. I go to Jefferson Middle. My dad came here from Aleppo. He used to teach engineering back home, but after we lost our home to the bombings, he cleaned toilets to feed us. Every night, he came home smelling like bleach and metal. But he never complained. He just said, "This country gives us peace. I can sleep at night now, even if I do it on my knees." Her voice broke. She wiped her eyes. He couldn't come today, but someone had to, because rent doesn't wait, and hospitals don't take broken promises as payment. She opened the notebook. "I brought this. I don't know if it matters to any of you, but last semester, I wrote a paper called What Power Looks Like from a Mop Bucket. It won my school's civics award." She held it up. A worn cover with pencil sketches along the border outlines of her father's hands, mop handles, and janitor carts. A whisper ran through the group. The Norwegian diplomat stepped forward, breaking ranks. "May I read it?" Colonel Bridges tried to protest, but Dr. Monroe raised a hand. Miriam hesitated, then handed him the notebook. He flipped to the first page. As he read, his brows furrowed, then lifted. He looked up after 2 minutes and said quietly, "Everyone in this room should read this." And somehow, unbelievably, they did. Military men, suited officials, defense analysts with MBAs. They sat on benches and hallway chairs. Some leaned against walls. Others sat cross-legged on the cold tile. No one left the corridor. The meeting was delayed. Phones silenced. Protocol shattered. All to listen to a girl. Miriam stood still while they read her words about how her father mopped the floors of war's decision-makers. How she learned more about leadership from the calluses on his palms than from any textbook. How the smell of bleach reminded her that dignity could survive anything. And when it was done, no one said a word. Until Dr. Monroe stepped forward. "You just reminded this building what it forgot." The guards didn't take her away. Instead, someone brought her a chair. And the next morning, Miriam Haddad's essay was printed and circulated to every department in the Pentagon. Mandatory reading. Because sometimes, a story mopped in silence becomes louder than a war room. The next day, Miriam didn't come back. She had no idea that her words had stirred something in the heart of the Pentagon. She had no idea that Defense Secretary Langford himself had demanded a copy of her essay be briefed at his morning intelligence report. She didn't see the email threads with subject lines like "Teen Essay," "Required Reading for Ethics Roundtable," or "Incident with Janitor's Daughter Potential Public Impact." All she knew was that her father was still sick, the rent was still overdue, and she had school in the morning. So she washed out the mop bucket, folded the badge back into her father's wallet, and sat on the bus home in silence, her hands red and stinging, her stomach growling. Back at the Haddad apartment, a dim one-bedroom in southeast D.C. above a closed pawn shop, her mother kissed her forehead silently, without asking what had happened. Her father was still asleep, still wheezing, still warm. No press showed up. No government agents knocked. No one called. So for the next 2 days, she went back to school. But inside the Pentagon, things were far from normal. That morning, a classified briefing opened with a line that made several top advisors blink in confusion. "Let's start today with a different kind of intelligence report," said Dr. Elaine Monroe. She handed out printed copies of Miriam's essay. Some chuckled. Others scoffed. But Monroe was not known for sentimentality. She was known for calling out 3-star generals for misreporting ethics violations. If she wanted them to read a schoolgirl's essay, they read it. And then, a strange thing happened. The room softened. Because Miriam didn't write like a child. She wrote like a daughter. She wrote with the pain of someone who had lost a country and tried to love a new one that didn't always love her back. She wrote like someone who had watched her father go from scientist to cleaner, from respected to invisible. And she asked a question none of them could ignore. If the hands that clean your floor are never seen, what else are you stepping over? Colonel Bridges didn't speak that meeting. He was too busy remembering the face of the girl he had yelled at. Too busy wondering how many Miriams he had passed in his 20 years of service without seeing them, without ever thinking they had something to say. Meanwhile, in a marble-floored office 5 levels below, Secretary Langford sat alone with the essay. He had grown up in Nebraska. A white man, 6th-generation military. His father had fought in Vietnam. His grandfather in Normandy. He had never scrubbed anything but a rifle. He read her words slowly. Twice. And when his aide entered with his coffee, Langford said without looking up, "Find that girl." The aide blinked. "Sir, find her. I want her in this building by the end of the week." But Miriam didn't come back. because she didn't know she had been invited. Not until Friday morning, when her school principal pulled her from second period with a stiff smile. "There's someone here to see you, Miriam." Two black SUVs were parked outside Jefferson Middle. Her classmates gasped. She thought it was ICE. Her hands trembled. But when she stepped into the hallway, she saw a woman with silver hair and a warm expression. "Dr. Monroe," the woman said, extending her hand. "Pentagon Policy and Ethics." Miriam froze. "Am I in trouble?" The woman smiled. "On the contrary, you're about to change federal policy." 2 hours later, she was sitting in a conference room that smelled like leather and paper. Across the table sat 3 people in suits. On the wall was a seal she had only seen on movies, United States Department of Defense. "Do you know why you're here?" Langford asked. She shook her head. "We read your essay. It made us uncomfortable." She swallowed. "That's a compliment," he added. "We need to be uncomfortable more often." Then he stood. "We'd like to formally invite you to be part of the Pentagon Youth Civic Initiative. It's a pilot program. You'd be our first member. We want your perspective in the room. Not someday. Now." Miriam blinked. "But I'm 13. You're also brave, articulate, and apparently capable of stopping a NATO meeting with a mop." Everyone chuckled. Even Miriam. Langford handed her a folder. Inside was a badge. Real. With her photo. Under it, Youth Advisor Policy Ethics. She stared. "I can't accept this," she said. "I'm not important." Dr. Monroe leaned forward. "You're not here because you're important, Miriam. You're here because you matter. That's different." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "I don't know anything about defense," she whispered. "You know about dignity," Monroe said. "We forget about that sometimes." They gave her the weekend to decide. She walked home slowly, her head spinning. She didn't know if she could do it. Her mother kissed her when she told them. Her father cried. That night, Miriam sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. She titled the first page, "What the Floor Sees." She wrote until dawn. On Monday, she accepted. She was issued a guest pass, a security protocol briefing, and a spot at the end of the monthly ethics roundtable. Her seat was smaller. Her voice, at first, was too soft. But they heard her. And then, slowly, they started listening. She talked about invisibility. She talked about language. She talked about how the term collateral damage doesn't mean much until it's your cousin's bakery that got blown up. She talked about how her father taught her that cleaning the floor wasn't shameful but stepping over people was. She made them all uncomfortable again, especially Colonel Bridges. One afternoon, he stayed behind after a meeting. She noticed him hesitating at the door. Then, quietly, he said, "Miss Haddad, about that day in the hallway. I was out of line." She looked up. "I didn't see you," he continued. "Not really. And that's on me." She nodded. "Now you do." He left without another word. By spring, Miriam had helped design the Pentagon's first Dignity in Labor Recognition Program and initiative to publicly recognize the service staff of the building, including janitors, cafeteria workers, and maintenance crews. Her father's name was the first one honored. They gave him a medal. He brought it home and placed it next to his mop. "For visibility," he said. That summer, a journalist caught wind of the story. And then it wasn't just the Pentagon listening anymore. The first headline came quietly. A modest piece in the Washington Post titled, "From Mop to Microphone: How a Janitor's Daughter Sparked a Pentagon Reckoning." It began with a simple retelling of the incident in the hallway, quoted a few lines from Miriam's essay, and closed with a photo taken quietly from behind of the girl in the blue hijab seated at a table far too large for her, speaking while 5 senior officials took notes. By the following Monday, 3 more outlets had picked it up. By Wednesday, CNN was calling. Miriam didn't answer. She was in her room helping her father with English forms for Medicaid applications. His cough had gotten worse again, and though the medal now hung beside the family Quran, the system that ignored him for years still made it nearly impossible for him to get proper treatment. "I don't want to be on TV," Miriam told her mother. "They'll twist it." Her mother, Yasmin, nodded. "Then let your work speak instead. You don't owe anyone your face." So when 60 Minutes called next, Dr. Monroe took the interview instead. "I'm not saying she's a miracle," Monroe said calmly to the camera. "I'm saying she's what happens when the ignored get heard." Miriam didn't enter a battlefield. She entered a blind spot, and she made the Pentagon blink. But not everyone was blinking willingly. Online, The backlash brewed fast and ugly. Why is a Muslim kid advising the Pentagon? Where are her parents? False flag liberal stunt. Next thing you know, we'll be letting janitors run the Joint Chiefs. They dug up photos of her father, distorted facts about his immigration, accused her mother of being a silent extremist. And then the threats began. Emails, DMs, voicemails to the school. One message read simply, "You and your family don't belong. Go back." Back where? Miriam had never set foot in Syria. She was born at Howard University Hospital during a blizzard. She could name all 50 states by age 7. She recited the Pledge of Allegiance every Monday morning like everyone else. But none of that mattered. One night, after someone threw eggs at their apartment door, Miriam found her father silently taking down the medal. "Don't," she said. "We didn't ask for this," he whispered. "Maybe it's better we disappear again. You go back to school. I go back to work. Let them forget." She stared at the mop leaning against the wall. "Abu," she said quietly, "what if I want them to remember?" He looked at her, then slowly handed the medal to her. "Then keep standing," he said, "even if your knees shake." So she did. The next week, she returned to the Pentagon, walked past the armed guards and marble security, and took her seat at the ethics roundtable. The theme that month, unseen labor and the foundations of power. When her turn came to speak, she stood. "I know some of you think I shouldn't be here," she said clearly, her voice firm now. "That I'm too young, or too Muslim, or too brown, or too poor. But I'm not asking to be here because of what I am. I'm here because what you do affects people like me. And someone has to tell you how it really lands." Silence. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. Colonel Bridges lowered his eyes. Secretary Langford tapped his pen against the table thoughtfully. After the meeting, one of the junior analysts, a woman named Rosa who was first-generation Mexican-American, stopped Miriam in the hallway. "My mother cleaned federal courthouses," Rosa said, her eyes glassy. "I used to help her at night. No one ever saw her either. What you're doing, it matters." That night, Miriam added a new essay to her notebook. Title, "How Silence Soaks into the Carpet." By June, the Youth Civic Initiative had expanded. 3 more students were selected. Jamal from Detroit, whose brother had been deported, Lily from Appalachia, whose father was a coal miner and veteran, and Noah from Minnesota, a trans teen who had faced harassment in school but wanted to join the Air Force one day. Together, they formed a new advisory subcommittee, Voices from the Margins. Most staff rolled their eyes at first. "Another diversity PR stunt," some muttered. But then the committee made their first formal recommendation. All federal buildings employing service labor must include quarterly listening sessions with their cleaning and maintenance staff. It passed. Then they pushed for a nameplate initiative. Custodial staff would no longer be anonymous. Their names, languages spoken, and years of service would be displayed proudly outside major wings. It passed too. Slowly, power began to tilt microscopically toward the invisible. Miriam didn't stop. She still woke at 5:30 to catch the metro. Still brought her notebook and sat cross-legged in the Pentagon's atrium with a plastic cup of mint tea and wrote down every overheard whisper that reminded her how easily power forgets humility. She was no longer a guest. She was a mirror. And mirrors, when placed in the right corridors, start showing people things they don't want to see. One day in late summer, a surprise request came from the office of the Joint Chiefs. Miriam was invited to speak formally at a private gathering of the nation's top military advisors and civilian strategists. The theme of the symposium? Reimagining security. She wore her best white blouse, polished her shoes, and wrapped her favorite navy hijab around her head, the same one from the mop incident. When she stepped onto the podium, no one laughed. No one dismissed. They listened. "Security," she began, "is not just about bombs, borders, or bunkers. It's about whether a janitor can take a sick day without risking eviction. Whether a brown kid with a notebook can walk through a hallway without being called a threat. It's about whether your nation sees the people who hold it up from the bottom." She paused. "My father used to say, 'What good is peace in the sky if there's pain on the floor?'" There was no applause protocol in these meetings. But someone started clapping anyway. And soon, the room rose to its feet. A standing ovation. For the janitor's daughter. By autumn, the story of Miriam Haddad had traveled far beyond Washington. Her words were now taught in public school curriculums across Maryland and Virginia under a new pilot called Voices That Matter. College ethics courses cited her essay What Power Looks Like from a Mop Bucket as a case study in modern civic courage. A photo of her standing with her father in the Pentagon courtyard, his old uniform beside her new badge, was published on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Youngest Voice in the Room." But with visibility came weight. Some nights, Miriam still cried. The pressure of carrying a family's history, a community's pain, and a nation's attention at 13 was not something she asked for. Sometimes, she still just wanted to play Roblox or draw cartoons about space like she used to. "I miss being nobody," she once whispered to her mom as they folded laundry on the floor. Her mother cupped her face. "Habibti, nobody doesn't exist. You were always somebody. The world just opened its eyes late." Still, the burden was real. And it grew heavier when an anonymous federal staffer leaked an internal email mocking the Youth Civic Initiative as a glorified daycare to make liberals feel good. The memo was signed off with the line, "Let the janitors clean. Let the children grow up. This isn't their place." The outrage was immediate. So was the pain. Miriam didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, she walked into the ethics office, marched up to Dr. Monroe's desk, and said, "I want to write a response." Dr. Monroe handed her a legal pad and a pen. Miriam wrote until her fingers ached. And then she stood in front of a press room packed wall to wall with journalists, aides, and officers, and read aloud. "You say this isn't my place. But you forget, my father's sweat helped build this place. My mother's silence fed it. My community's absence made room for your assumptions. So now that I am here, now that I am no longer invisible, I will not apologize for occupying the space your comfort once filled. I didn't ask to be born in the margins, but I did choose to speak from them. And I will keep speaking. Because justice doesn't begin in a boardroom. It begins when the people you walk past start speaking loud enough for you to turn around." The room exploded. That clip was shared more than 17 million times across platforms. President Alder referenced her words in his next State of the Union address. Even conservative outlets, reluctant but forced to reckon, called it the most impactful 3-minute speech delivered by a civilian under 15 in Pentagon history. And then came the letter, stamped and sealed in gold, delivered by a courier in a dark navy suit, addressed not to Miss Haddad, but simply to Miriam. It was from the president himself. "Dear Miriam, we say the White House is the people's house. You reminded us who the people truly are. I would be honored to meet you, not as a president to an advisor, but as a student to a teacher. With gratitude and hope. A. Alder." Miriam didn't cry. She stared at the envelope for a long time, then simply nodded. When she finally stood in the East Room 3 weeks later, facing a sea of camera flashes and dignitaries, the president welcomed her with a hand on her shoulder. "She's not here today because of privilege," he told the press. "She's here because of presence. She showed up, and when we tried not to look, she made us." That day, the administration announced the Haddad Fellowship for Civic Courage, a program to bring young people from underserved communities into the heart of policy conversations. Not to wait until they grew up, but to teach grown-ups how to listen now. The first recipient? A Syrian-American boy in Michigan whose mother cleaned hospitals. His name was Tariq. He cried when he met Miriam. "Your story is my story," he whispered. She smiled. "Then tell it." Louder. Years passed. The Pentagon Youth Civic Initiative became a cornerstone program replicated in 15 federal agencies. Miriam returned to Jefferson Middle and finished 8th grade at the top of her class. Her notebooks were preserved in the Library of Congress. Her speech was studied at West Point. But through it all, she still came home each day to her parents' tiny apartment. Still helped her mother make lentil soup on Fridays. Still sat beside her father during Ramadan, breaking fast with dates and tea. One evening, as the sun set over the Capitol, her father turned to her on the balcony. "I used to think we were lucky just to survive here," he said. "But you made us more than survivors." She didn't reply. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder. In the distance, the Washington Monument glowed gold against the darkening sky. The same sky that once hung above Aleppo. The same sky that saw pain, migration, silence, and now, something else. Voice. And then, on the 5th anniversary of the day she spilled a mop bucket outside Conference Room D, Miriam Haddad returned to that same corridor. But this time, not as a janitor's daughter, not even as a youth advisor. She returned as Deputy Director of Civic Equity, the youngest person to ever hold a federal leadership title in that division. She wore a dark navy hijab embroidered with tiny silver threads, a gift from her mother. In her hand was a pen passed down from Dr. Monroe, who had retired and left behind a simple note. Make sure the floor never gets quiet again. As she walked past the polished tiles, a new plaque caught her eye. It read, "In honor of all who labored unseen, inspired by the courage of one who refused to stay invisible. Miriam Haddad, the girl who made power listen." She stood in silence for a moment. Then, with a quiet smile, she whispered, "Abu, we're still here." And for the first time, every step she took echoed not as interruption, but as arrival. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.